Sorry, I'll be quiet.
This evening on the Your Life Matters Show podcast, the title of our episode is It's Not Just in Your Head. Our discussion this evening will be about trauma. The truth is, trauma isn't always about what happened. It's about how it changed you. Maybe it was a moment. Maybe it was your whole childhood. Tonight, we're going to talk about the short and long-term effects trauma can have on your mental and physical health, and how to begin healing. Whether you're carrying something quietly or just starting to understand your own story, tonight's episode is for you. 70% of adults worldwide have experienced at least one traumatic event in their lives. In the United States, about 60% of men and 50% of women will experience at least one trauma in their lifetime. 1 in 3 children exposed to trauma will develop post-traumatic stress symptoms. Up to 80% of people exposed to a traumatic event experience acute stress symptoms immediately after, including intrusive thoughts or flashback sleep disturbances, irritability and mood swings, and physical symptoms like fatigue, aches, and stomach issues. Acute stress disorder, or ASD, occurs in 6 to 33% of individuals exposed to trauma, depending on the severity and type. For example, sexual assault has higher rates. PTSD affects about 6% of the population at some point in their lives, with women being twice as likely as men to develop it. Trauma survivors are 15 times more likely to attempt suicide, 4 times more likely to become an alcoholic, and 3 times more likely to experience depression. Childhood trauma is linked to a 260% increased risk of developing depression in adulthood. Long-term trauma can cause measurable changes in brain structure, particularly in the amygdala, hippocampus, and prefrontal cortex. Chronic trauma can lead to increased inflammation and a higher risk of heart disease, autoimmune disorders, and gastrointestinal issues. ACEs, or Adverse Childhood Experiences, are a critical area of study. The original ACE study found that people with 4 or more ACEs were 2.5 times more likely to have chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, or COPD. They were 4 times more likely to experience depression and 12 times more likely to attempt suicide. Over 2/3 of children report experiencing at least one traumatic event by the age of 16. At least 1 in 7 children experience abuse or neglect annually in the United States. Approximately 63.9% of U.S. adults reported at least one ACE, with 17.3% reporting 4 or more. Physical trauma and injuries have a significant annual impact. In the United States, injuries account for over 150,000 deaths and more than 3 million non-fatal injuries each year. Post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD, affects a significant portion of the population. In the general adult population, approximately 3.6% of U.S. adults experienced PTSD in the past year. The lifetime prevalence is about 6.8%. It's worth noting that PTSD is more prevalent among women at 5.2% compared to men at 1.8%. When it comes to veterans, the numbers are even more concerning. Among veterans receiving care in 2024, about 14% of men and 24% of women were diagnosed with PTSD. Veterans who served in Operation Iraqi Freedom and Operation Enduring Freedom have even higher rates, with up to 29% experiencing PTSD. If you've ever felt stuck, overwhelmed, or wondered why certain things trigger you, this episode is for you. You are not alone. Let's get into it. Here are your hosts, Steve Hodgson and psychotherapist Dr. Eric L. Davis from the Your Life Matters Show.
Well, howdy, and welcome to the Your Life Matters Show podcast, the show where we have honest, healing conversations about mental health, trauma, and your journey connecting your mental and physical well-being. I'm your host, Steve Hudson, and as always, I'm joined by our brilliant psychotherapist, our co-host, Dr. Eric L. Davis. Dr. Davis, thank you for joining us again this evening. We missed you
Always a
last
pleasure.
week.
Yeah. I couldn't help but watch the episode. I noticed that the guy that you had on said that he was bringing better looks. I beg to differ. I was
Bill
here
Bean,
first.
well, hey, he's divinely blessed, so we have to, we have to believe what he tells us there. Um, we're hoping tonight that we may also have a guest joining us. Now, first, I want to say if anyone is a little confused on, wait a minute, how did we get to this link when we were over there? The company we use, I don't want to say their name. Somehow we were working with tech support because, as you notice, Dr. Davis' screen keeps locking up a little bit. And when we went to them for help, as soon as they finished, none of our videos would work. Nothing would work. The whole thing just sort of locked up on us. So, we apologize for that. But, we're here now, and hopefully, if you're watching on Facebook and stuff and live streamed there, so you'll be able to see us. But we talked about spiritual warrior Bill Bean on last week, and he mentioned a few times about some of his clients and the work he was doing, which he had to get to the root of their trauma. Now, even though this topic was on our list, I decided moving it up so we have some continuity in the themes regarding your mental health. So today we're going to be talking about something that touches so many lives, and that's trauma. Now, whether it's a single painful moment or a series of difficult experiences, trauma leaves a mark, and it often shows up in ways we really didn't expect. Now, today we're going to be exploring the short term and the long term effects of trauma, the science behind how it impacts our lives and bodies, and most importantly, how healing is possible. And as I say, if we get lucky, we might even have a guest with us this evening. So, if you ever felt stuck, overwhelmed, or wondered why and how certain things trigger you, then this is going to be the episode for you. Now, we truly want you to know that you're not alone, that there's so much to cover on this topic. So I'm just going to delve right into it. Dr. Davis, let's start with the obvious first question we have. What is trauma?
So trauma is basically let's
Okay.
oh, I
He's
don't
not thinking about it. So, no, you were actually frozen, looking up at heaven for a second.
all right.
I was just coming in to say, okay, he's not thinking that much. Okay, go ahead.
But basically, it's just adverse experiences that you have, or a lot of times people downplay trauma. Also where they'll think, oh, I shouldn't be. Well, that shouldn't have affected me like that. The question I always ask clients is, says who? Well, why should it affect you like that? Because trauma is just really it's a learned, like if we learn a trauma response, and I know we'll dive a lot more into that.
Yes, we're going to go into a lot. So let me ask you, what qualifies as trauma?
Really anything that that causes a reaction, really. So trauma can be anything from like substance use disorder. There's no way to be an active addiction and not have some trauma. So trauma could be anything as large as like the passing of a loved one, or it could be something as small as almost getting into a fender bender. It really depends on the person and our ability to cope. But what's most important is that each person identifies the best ways to cope that work for them.
Yeah, there's, as I said in the opening, there's a difference between big trauma, okay, and that big T for trauma, which is like war and abuse, and then there's the little T trauma, which is bullying and divorce. Okay, now obviously, besides the obvious, from a mental side, what's the difference between that big T or that little T? Okay, I don't know, and we've seemed to
Can you
have
hear
looked
me?
at the tables again. Yes, now I can hear you.
Yes, sorry. I don't know why I keep getting kicked out for some reason. Um,
It's not me, I promise. But what's the
it's
difference
all good.
between big? What's the difference between that big T trauma and the little T trauma?
It's really just the level of trauma that happens. So what we call it in the helping profession is we talk about complex trauma. And basically trauma can build up. So let's say, for example, like adverse childhood experiences. As I experience things, there's basically what they call an allostatic load, and that's the amount of stress that I can deal with. Um, and there's a lot more stress and so forth with complex trauma typically than other things, but really trauma in and of itself is significant, big or small.
Um, I mean, I guess one of the main things that we need to hit is how is trauma, okay, whether it's big or small, how does it affect our brain and our bodies?
So it affects areas like the amygdala, the hippocampus. It affects our ability to reason, and the nervous system can become overactivated. Um, and there's things such as headaches, gastrointestinal issues, chronic pain. I mean, it can. What's amazing about that is, I mean, think of all the ways that trauma that an emotional thing can affect us physically. That's pretty powerful, I believe.
How about trauma sufferers? I mean, are there a lot of people that suffer from trauma, even quietly, that, everyday people that you and I see that really suffering from trauma and they're just not saying anything about it?
I think that a lot of people suffer in silence. It a lot of times it has to do with basically what type of culture the family that you grew up in had. Where, like in my family, as you know, we're like totally open, TMI. Like the too much information all the time. We talk about everything, and really, it's like there's not anything that we couldn't discuss on some level. And then in other families, sometimes there will be a culture of you suffer in silence, you don't complain, you don't talk about what's going on, you're to be seen, not heard. And that really people who are taught to stuff, their emotions and not that just exacerbates the trauma.
In the opening video, which at least that video played, the other two wouldn't play. But there are many different traumas, the types of traumas that we're going to cover today. As I said earlier, there's short and long term trauma. There's adverse childhood experience, which is called ACEs.
Yep.
There's physical trauma and injuries, and there's PTSD for people, and our great veterans. And then we'll try even covering some healing and intervention. So when we talk about the short term effects, what takes place with the person? Like in movies and TV, they frequently show a person having flashbacks. I mean, is that something that's usual?
Absolutely, yeah. It can be flashbacks. It can be, just feelings of anxiety or hypervigilance, fear, trouble sleeping. There's a number of things that trauma can do. As far as long-term effects, it leads to things like dissociation, personality changes, physical health problems, relationship difficulties. Um, and it can also greatly increase the risk for suicide and other self-destructive things.
Now, let me ask you: does it happen just when they're awake, or can it affect them even in their sleep?
It could affect them even in their sleep, because I've had clients that, have been through really terrible experiences, and they'll have dreams about that, and same type of thing. What people with substance use disorder experience a lot, and I definitely have, is we'll have using dreams, where it's like, you're asleep and you have a dream that you're using, you can taste it, all that, and you wake up in a sweat, just um, completely, thinking, oh no, I can't believe this happened, and none of it was real. And it's like, wow. So it can even affect when we're not awake.
And that's got to be scary for people that, even not realizing that they're experiencing trauma, to
Yeah.
relive those situations over and over again.
Yeah.
And at night, and how many of us don't remember our dreams? So we're being traumatized during our sleep and not even remembering the dream that's causing the drama. And I mean, that's got to explain why some of those people probably get irritable and probably even moody.
Yeah.
If you're going to be kept awake after night, going through some bad experience, playing it over and over in your head, you know, heck, I wake up moody just when the dogs bark and wake me up during the night. So I can imagine what they go through.
Definitely.
Now, in the opening film, um, we talked about sexual assault cases, and there's higher rates of trauma for people that suffer sexual assault. Why is that?
I think it's just a matter of the type of trauma that it is. There's the victimization, the shame, etc. And I've worked with a lot of clients that have experienced sexual abuse, and their the post-traumatic stress that they experience really does seem like it's some of the worst. You know,
Yeah, it's some of it is really bad. Um, I've known people that have gone through that, and it actually not only affects sleep and stuff, but it affects their current relationships or future relationships as
yeah,
well, because they got that guard they put up right away, and they might not even realize they're doing it, but it's their body really setting up a defense mechanism so that they don't get traumatized again.
yeah. I mean that really what a lot of the issues that people experience, when you really look at it on its face, it's just an adaptive response to what's going on. So an example of that would be, um, back when I was playing in a band and trying to get gigs all the time and stuff. I remember I went into a venue, and there was a guy. He was sitting at like a bar and he was eating a plate of food. And this is how long ago it was. I had a cassette tape, and actually Adam was with me. So I walk in with the cassette tape, and I walk up behind this guy eating, and I hand the thing over, hand the tape to the bartender or whatever. And the guy kind of turns like that, and he goes, "I don't like people standing behind me when I eat." And I was like, "Oh, I'm sorry, man," and just left. And that kind of stuck with me. And I was talking to one of my friends about it, and he was like, "Well, maybe that guy went to prison. Like if you're in prison and you're eating and somebody walks up behind you, they could be trying to do something to you, steal your food, so basically what was an adaptive response in the prison environment that kept him safe becomes maladaptive on the outside, So
Hmm.
like those things such as, distrust or fear, you're exactly right. I mean, they can linger for forever, you know, but they can be
And it could be
addressed.
the most normal person, and all of
Mhm.
a sudden they do something like you say that just
Yeah.
throws you for a second. It's like, oh, where the heck did that just come from?
Mhm.
That
Yeah.
that just doesn't seem right. Um, and they really have to work on that. I mean, what are some of the signs that people have experienced trauma, recent trauma? Because right now we're talking short-term effects.
Yeah. Some of
What
the,
what is something we would see?
as far as short term, you would see anxiety, trouble sleeping, irritability, uh, shortness of breath sometimes. I mean, any of those things. With long term trauma, that's where you start to see things like generational trauma, because they've actually found that trauma can kind of be passed down generationally, which is pretty interesting when you think about that. So that would be an example of, a significantly traumatic event from the past that, has such an adverse effect. It affects generations thereafter. Um, Another thing that we talk about a lot, and I want to mention this too, just for the sake of mentioning it, is what we call trauma-informed care. And trauma-informed care is basically where we look at these sorts of things. So if somebody is, let's say somebody has a substance use issue and they're arrested, that's definitely traumatic. And basically, when they come in to treatment, we want to make sure and not re-traumatize them. So there's lots of different ways that places can make sure that we're offering trauma-informed care, but I won't bore you to tears.
Well, I mean, we have a lot of people that out there in the world that are suffering from trauma, and I'm going to go into, it's a segue into the long-term effects. But I read that with trauma survivors, they're 15 times more likely to attempt suicide. Okay, and we've talked about suicide a number of occasions here. They are 4 times more likely to become an alcoholic and 3 times more likely to experience depression. So, what are some of the long-term effects that people deal with?
Well, definitely like, depressive disorder. That would be a big depressive disorder is something that is seen a lot because one of my mentors coming up in the field, something that he said, and I've always remembered this, his name was John Sullivan. He passed away not too long ago, but he was a mentor of mine, awesome guy. And something that he always told me about depression is he said, depression there's clinical depression, but then there can also be like situational depression, so forth. And he said that a lot of times depression arrives when people do too much for too long, and it just exhausts their entire, like their emotional system, their nervous system, their body, everything. And I always thought that was really interesting, so he basically said it would be like a, not only mental, but a physical manifestation of doing too much for too long,
But when we look at someone who's an alcoholic, or even we did the show on the heroin addiction, someone who's addicted, we don't always look at it and say, gee, okay, they must be suffering some type of trauma, or this is the result of some type of trauma, depression. Right away, I mean, stereotypes. Okay, they're just a loser. Okay, they're drinking. They care less of doing drugs. They care more about the drugs than they care about the family. I mean, we blah blah blah. We can add 100 things there. Okay, why is it that we don't? Why has society, let's put it that way, gotten to the point where they're not realizing that gambling addiction or drug addiction or alcoholism, all those addictions could be caused by some form of trauma?
Yeah, I mean, typically what you find, and it really comes back to the lifestyle that a person lives in active addiction. But I mean, the reality is, there's like a substance use lifestyle is going to cause trauma, going to jail, being arrested. I mean, there's trauma everywhere. So, yeah, sorry, I lost my train of thought a little bit. I'm sorry, man.
Well, it's more with society, is what we would say. Why are we looking that way?
I think that we come from a society where a lot of times it's the culture of you just need to pull up your bootstraps and make it happen, or you just need to try harder, that. And I think that when it comes to mental health, that is a really, we're really sending people in the wrong direction. And the reason I say that is because if I have post-traumatic stress disorder, because I have been through, because I have tons of adverse childhood experiences and trauma, in adulthood, there's not really necessarily, I can't just automatically think myself out of that. I mean, how do you do that? You can't just forget about what happened. So a lot of times we'll use exposure therapy or, narrative therapy, where I have I had a client that I worked with once that they had a family member that in active addiction went to all these different areas of town, and they would go to all these areas looking for that family member. And so when that family member, passed away, then there was immense trauma in all of those places. And so part of, after a while of therapy, um, and she came up with this idea, and I thought it was awesome. She went to those places, like on the weekend when she was off work, she would go to those places and reclaim them as her own. And that was, there wasn't a way to just snap your fingers. And obviously that doesn't mean that if she drives through an area that she'll never think about that trauma again, but there's something to attach to the end of that trauma where it's, well, yeah, that was, this terrible thing happened, but it's not happening right now today. And, I'm okay. So
I don't think a lot of people realize too that the trauma can be so bad that, like we said, that a person will turn to suicide. They just don't think that there's any way out.
Yeah.
And so, how do you deal with someone that comes to you like that and saying, that's it? I'm sure they hear this on the suicide hotline all the time, but how do we talk someone down, so to speak, from that point of where they just want to end it all?
I think that what's effective, and part of it is trying to talk them down, but I think that just having empathy, a lot of times, and just being there. Because when a person, if you think about it, typically in some of our darkest moments of our lives, a lot of times we're alone, and we don't have anybody to reach out to. And that's what makes it such a horrendous experience that we think back to. So one of the best things that we can do is just simply be there for somebody. Even if there's not something that I can immediately do that's going to solve everything, I can at least be there to support the person. And if they're going through something rough, at least they don't have to go through it alone.
Mm-hmm. Can this be passed down generationally?
Yeah, trauma absolutely can. Just like other mental health conditions. I mean, trauma really that's a result of the environment, but same thing with behavioral health stuff. I mean, there are hereditary components to just about everything, kind of scary.
Yeah. Okay, we're trying to cover a lot in the small amount of time that we usually have on the show. I want to talk about ACEs that we talked about before, the adverse childhood experiences. Let's just start with the obvious. What kind of experiences are we talking about?
It could be anything. It could be being left alone. It could be, a little kid getting lost, a kid being abused, being made fun of, bullying. I mean, anything that typically, so the way I define abuse is anything I say or do that violates the golden rule. So if you think about it, anything that I do that violates the golden rule, anytime I treat somebody in a way I wouldn't want to be treated, that's abuse. There's a potential for trauma, and that doesn't mean that, if I'm at the grocery store and accidentally drop a can of corn in front of somebody, that, they're going to be traumatized for life. But, it's the response that the person has to the event or the experience is much more important than what the event or experience. Does that make sense? It's like,
yes,
we can't change the experience. We can rewrite the narrative to a degree, but we can't just change what happened.
Right. What happened. It's how you look at what happened.
Absolutely.
And the way you're perceiving what happened. Now, does it ever affect the child physically?
It can, yeah. I mean, a child could have stomach problems from worrying all the time, or, like I've seen a lot of that where individuals that are, have significant trauma that just will worry themselves sick, and the good news is that therapy actually can help. I'm a little biased as a therapist, but I truly believe that therapy can help, because something that, the old saying, there's safety in numbers. And the reality is, when I'm going through the day, and this is the same for everybody. Each of us sees everything from our perspective, and we're bringing all of our past perspectives, all of the questions we have about life, all that to every interaction. And so sometimes having somebody that you can just kind of talk through things with can make a huge difference, because it can also help you to see things from a perspective maybe you couldn't before.
Now, what about, depression? I think we all recognize depression in adults, or have a good idea of it. What about children? Do children get depressed?
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, anybody can get
What should we
depressed.
look for when they get what should we look for that we know that the child is depressed and not just tired and just
I think a lot of times, if you know your child, if something seems off, and I kind of leave it broad like that, because if you're a parent and you're dealing with your children, and you know them really well, and something just seems off, or they just don't seem like their self, there could be signs of something there, and it definitely wouldn't hurt to ask, or take them to a professional, or whatever it takes. But if you have a gut feeling that something's off or somebody's not okay, my advice is follow your gut instinct, because you typically, not always, but we typically feel that way for a reason.
then what about suicide for children? Is that something that's prevalent?
I don't think it's as prevalent as probably for adults, but I mean, it definitely is prevalent, you know, and I think a lot of the suicides, with kids, a lot of times have to do with bullying or abuse, or sometimes it's just depression, but the depression can be a result of those things also. So there again, if it's for a child, the big thing would be to make sure and remove any um, means of doing harm to their self.
Talking to our guest that's supposed to be here, it's got caught up in work, so I'm not sure they're going to be able to be with us. I want to go to physical trauma and
Mhm.
injuries, so this way I keep going on this here. Now, in the U.S., injuries account for over 150,000 deaths and more than 3 million non fatal injuries each year. So, what type of trauma does a person experience after they experience some type of physical trauma or injury? What do they start to show?
Usually anxiety, where they'll be afraid of things that, maybe they wouldn't have before. But I mean, it can affect a person in flashbacks, especially if it's something that's very violent and sudden, because what's happening is, it's kind of like, last week or a couple weeks ago, we were talking about my grandma, and then I was watching the episode with my brother, and you mentioned that, and you said, and it's so weird, because when you said my grandma's name, like, I could smell her and hear her, and and that's because I've been imprinted. My mind, or my brain, has been physically imprinted with that. And so what the brain does is to protect us. If we find ourselves in a situation that maybe is somewhat similar to what we went through that was traumatic, our brain automatically kicks in that fight or flight response to try and protect us. But like I said, if that's what I'm used, if that's how my body adapts, and that's how I've adapted to the trauma in one environment, those same things that helped me survive in that first environment could become maladaptive afterwards, even, you know?
Well, we could actually do an entire show on why you felt your grandmother by you at that point,
Yeah.
because there'd be a couple of other reasons some people would jump in and say why.
Yeah.
Um, Here's what I don't get, but and really, it's a question that, believe it or not, that even doing the research that I wrote, you would think after the body has dealt with such a physical trauma, such as an injury or an accident. Okay, let's say you get hit by a car and you've
Yep.
been, God forbid, you've been laid up for months. Okay, why does the body and mind force a person to suffer even more down the line? You would think that, there'd be some kind of defense mechanism to say, hey, enough already, okay? The
I
body,
think
we've been through enough.
a lot of it, a lot of times is just hypervigilance, especially with trauma, because, um, if I am just driving down the road, not hurting a soul, and have, all of a sudden, bam, there's this big wreck, that's a very intense experience. And so, really, what my brain is doing is it's trying to protect me. And that is why, if I got in the car, again, after a bad experience or something, I may be more hypervigilant or more afraid, because my brain is saying, hey, remember that one time and how bad that was? So, it's, it's us adapting, but um, after a while, it becomes maladaptive. It becomes a problem rather than a solution, or a hindrance or a harm rather than something that protects us.
Yeah, and what I want to do is I want to move on to one of the last things I want to talk about here before, because we might even have our guest still. I'm not 100% sure yet. Um, I want to talk about PTSD. Now, there are two different things, we're going to talk about. One is the general adult population, and then there are great veterans. Okay, so I
Yeah.
just want to start first with the general population. For those who may not know the real definition, what is PTSD?
So it stands for post traumatic stress disorder, and really it's the thoughts and emotions, or feelings that I experience after a traumatic event. Um, and that's, I mean, really, that's the gist of it. It's the symptoms that develop as a result of having experienced trauma, and that's what it is. What they've started to find, though, and this is something which maybe we can do another whole episode on this, but they've actually um, started to find. So there's research for PTSD, especially, where they're finding that number one, uh, eye movement desensitization reintegration, or EMDR. They found that has made a big difference. Also, with PTSD, some of the coolest things that I've seen are there are some researchers, one in particular at Indiana University, who is developing a virtual reality program, um, and that's for PTSD, and that's awesome. So like they're able to things like speaking to a past version of yourself, or speaking to a future version of yourself. I mean, even those are really amazing things. They're also seeing with PTSD, in addition to the EMDR, there's some research, and I don't have the statistics in front of me or anything, but I know that ketamine therapy is something that many have looked at also, that has been found to be effective for PTSD symptoms or depression.
Now, I'm going to come back to the veterans thing on PTSD, because I actually want to stay a little bit on PTSD, but I actually have our guest here
All right.
in the studio with us. So I'm going to bring him in the conversation. Okay, he goes by the name of Dave. Um, Now, the person we're about to speak to um, is dealing with trauma experiences, from both the actual trauma and the long term symptoms that he's dealing with even today. Now, this person has been in law enforcement. And I want to say, before we get into this whole thing about law enforcement, see, I come from a family of police officers in both New York and Maryland. I have the highest regard for law enforcement personnel. They go out, they put their lives on the line every day for us. They work long hours. They put up with so much crap from people, and now with the media. They sacrifice so much of their lives to help. We're taking we're taking them away from their families, their loved ones, for a job that has such a mental toll on the people. Okay, there's some there's some kind of scar they carry that's really hard to heal. Now, if you were presented with the same situations that they were day in and day out, you'd have some problems as well. And it's not just police officers, same thing for firefighters, EMS, people in the armed forces. They all face stressful situations on a daily basis. And sometimes all they get is, oh, the police are bad or they're evil. Let's defund the police and stuff. I mean, it makes my stomach turn and my heart ache because, as I said, my father was a New York City police officer. And we lived through what he dealt with every day as a family because they take that home with them. Now, we truly want to thank you for joining us this evening, Dave.
Hi, Dave.
We understand that this can get intense. So we truly hope you're willing, we truly appreciate your willingness to share your story with us. So can you hear us, Dave? Dave? I don't hear Dave. Dave, if you can hear us, you don't have sound for some reason. I see you a little bit, but I see you waving, but we don't have sound. Okay, you just came back in. Ah, there you go. Now we should be able to hear you. Dave? Say something to us, Dave. Let's see something. Dave, can you hear me? Okay, we'll try it again. Dave? Okay, we'll work on getting Dave into this in a few minutes. I'm going to go back to Dr. Davis and myself until we're able to get him back in. And I don't know why we lost Dr. Davis too in all of this. There he is.
Okay.
Yeah, now I can hear you.
All right.
I don't understand what. The only thing I'll say, if Dave can hear me, at least, is to there's a round gear down the bottom there. Click the gear and make sure you have the right audio picked, the right microphone, because that might have something to do with it. Now see when you're able to get that back, because it will show up on my screen that you have audio again. But before we get you described what PTSD was. I think it's important that people realize that people are suffering from PTSD. Sorry, I heard a sound and I thought that maybe he was back with us, but he's not back with us yet. So I'm trying to find actually where we left off here, and I really apologize for that because I know we had it. I want to go into, I guess I'll go into veterans, okay, with PTSD, okay, because I at least found that. What type of symptoms does a veteran display that has PTSD?
So they would display, trouble sleeping, nightmares. Sometimes it's, obviously sometimes an injury with a physical ailment that, continues and that they have to continue to deal with, and that can be traumatic. But I think, usually it is either fear or anxiety, a lot of times, or I've also seen where there will be instances where the veteran will fly off, like basically they will feel extremely irritable, and so forth, and basically fly off the handle, so what happens in the body is it's kind of like, I always call it the stress bucket or the anger bucket or whatever. But if I have a bucket and I pour stress in that, if the bucket was empty at first, okay, then I just poured the stress in there. But if the bucket's full to the brim and I pour stress in it, that stress pours out all over everything in my life. And so if you think about someone experiencing PTSD, that anxiety is revved at full blast, all the time. And so that could be part of the, irritability or those sorts of things. But my heart breaks a lot of times for veterans, because I know, and for police officers, like you said, I know that I've worked with veterans and police officers that have seen things that things that luckily I didn't see, but I'll never unhear, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I can go like my uncle who actually had to leave the New York City police force because some guy that they were trying to subdue some guy, and he was about 6'7", weighed about 300 pounds. This guy that was subduing him and his partner, and this guy picked up both of them one by one, and picked them up over his head and flung them against the parked car.
Wow.
I mean that's
Yeah.
I mean that's the kind of stuff that can happen, and even my dad who got a collapsed lung and he was even off duty. And that's the thing too that I didn't say in that other thing. They're policemen, whether they're on duty or off duty. I can remember my dad many times, even like shoplifters and stuff. Taking down a shoplifter outside of a store or something. When he was there with us, with his family, they never are off. And during his off duty hours, he ran into a hotel, and this little motel, and actually it was on fire, and actually went and grabbed people out of the hotel like 4 or 5 times and got a collapsed lung from it because he kept going back in over and over again. Plus, he lost his hearing because he was at the front. He worked down in Chinatown, and he was in front of the New Year's Day parade, the China New Year's, and somebody threw like 50 cherry bombs, like right at the front where the dragon was, and actually blew his eardrums almost out completely. So it's kind of really, really, really bad.
I'll give you. Let me. Here's an example that is a perfect case of veteran PTSD. A client that I worked with years ago was a veteran, and he'd been in war, and we were watching. The guys wanted to watch the movie G.I. Jane.
Okay, now he froze. Okay, let's see. He's back. So,
Wow.
okay,
All right.
you said the guys wanted to watch the film G.I. Jane, and that's the last thing we
it was
heard.
like, so there was a scene in the movie where there's like helicopters flying, and that I remember we're sitting there watching the movie or whatever, and as soon as that noise came on, it was only a couple seconds later, he got up, came over, quietly to me and was like, "Hey, that sounds, I don't like that sound. That reminds me too much of some stuff." And it was like, "Oh, no problem at all, man. Go, you don't have to watch the rest." He was like, "Thank you." And I mean, so that's one of the ways that it could affect. Another veteran that I worked with, when I would meet with him in my office, he always wanted the door open, which was fine with me. I mean, usually we close the door for privacy, but he would have, he was like, "No, I just want the door open. I don't like being in an enclosed space," because of some of the experiences that he'd had. So sometimes it's things of those nature, but one of the greatest, so for PTSD, one of the great services that's available is like, Wounded Warrior projects, or military peers or veteran peers. I mean, that camaraderie, because what it really is if you think about it, if as a person in recovery from substance use disorder, and having lived those experiences, I have a major camaraderie with anybody, instant camaraderie with anyone else that's ever been through that type of thing. And it's kind of funny because as a person in recovery, like if I go to a meeting or something, the first thing I would always do is pick out all the reasons that I wouldn't be able to relate to each person. Well, that person looks like they've got buku bucks, and I'm definitely not rich, so I can't be helped by them. And this person, well, they look like their favorite type of music's country, and I like country, but it's not my favorite. I can't. I mean, it's like, other than, like, you have addiction, what more do you need in common with somebody? And so part of coping with, I think part of coping with PTSD, in addition to therapy and other types of treatments that help, but I think camaraderie with individuals who have been through similar things, that's the best support that you can find, really.
That's why places like the American Legion and the VFW halls are so
Yeah.
great, because the people go in there and they hang out with people that, they probably don't know but can share. They have just so much in common that they share with each other, and they can relate instantaneously. Whereas if they're telling you the story, we were, in this foxhole and stuff, you and I are not going to really, we can understand what they're saying and stuff, but those other people can relate on a different level because they've probably been in a foxhole
Yeah.
during a fight and stuff, and they know, right away, they can put themselves right there. Whereas we have to say, okay, we start thinking about, all right, there's a foxhole. It's a, what have we seen on TV and stuff? No, they've lived this in real life.
Yeah. I mean, and that's,
And,
yeah. No, go, what were you going to
no,
say?
go
I'm
ahead.
sorry.
I was just going to
gonna
say, sharing those experiences help. I mean, they're really important.
Yeah. It also, I mean, with support groups, and I can't stress this enough for really any condition. If it's PTSD, if it's anxiety, if it's addiction, if it's, depression, you name it. If you can find others that, are living life in spite of whatever it is that's going on, the beauty of that is their experience is valuable. As a person in recovery from whatever it is, if you have found what worked for you, maybe therapy worked for you, maybe it was a lifestyle change or something, that information is invaluable to individuals, to the individuals that come to recovery after us, because we can use those, traumatic experiences, like those experiences hurt us, but us having lived through those experiences can actually help others. And I think that's amazing. That's one of my favorite parts of being a therapist is, it's rough sometimes because we go into some pretty dark places, in people's lives and minds and all that. And, but seeing people improve and get better, I mean, that there's nothing better on earth, nothing better on earth.
Well, that gives us the perfect segue into healing and intervention. I obviously there's many types of treatment that's available. Can you talk about some of them? And a question is early intervention. Is that helpful?
So, yes, I mean, early intervention would be helpful as far as learning how to, if as soon as you can address trauma, the sooner you can address trauma, the better. Because with trauma, it does kind of, the more we experience that, like the more flashbacks I have, or the more times that a situation brings up this memory, the more used to that my brain gets. And so there's tons of different treatments. So like I said, EMDR, there's what's called trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy. There's narrative therapy, which I mentioned earlier, where we rewrite the narrative. It's like a lot of times if someone was abused, a lot of times it's, well, I was abused because I was wrong. And it's like, no, it's rewriting that narrative. I was abused because somebody else was wrong, and I didn't deserve that. And, and I deserve to get better and feel better in spite of having been through this. And then also, group therapy it can help significantly. And I think the reason that group therapy helps, or a support group, is because of that support. A big part of mental health issues is feeling like we're all alone. If let's say I start hearing voices in my head, but no one, like I'm alone, I'm experiencing that alone. But if I meet people that, have been through a similar thing, that's a priceless resource.
I was just going to say, if you're hearing voices in your head, you might be a psychic medium.
Yeah, true, true.
Yes, exactly. And that's why they all hang out together. Okay. I want to wrap up this part of the show and ask you if someone's listening right now, okay, someone who can relate to some of the trauma symptoms and events we spoke of tonight. And there's been a lot of them, and we've lightly touched on stuff. And, Dr. Davis said, we'll do further shows on this stuff and try to go further in the future and stuff. But again, Dave, can you hear us?
Can you hear me?
Yes. How you doing,
There
Dave?
he is. Okay.
Welcome.
I just want to
there.
say my wife is a genius.
Okay. Well, let me put it this way to you. Whether or not she is, that's a very smart move to say that.
She's standing here. Thanks.
Yes. Yes, yes, that too, okay? But, I happen to know her. So it's a very smart move for you to say that.
Good deal.
We're going to pick up that question in a second, Eric, that I was asking you. I want to go through. Can you share with our listeners while we have you? And we thank you again for being here. I don't know if you heard me the first time we were talking, but we couldn't find you there.
Right.
Can you share with your listeners a little something about the experiences that changed and impacted your life while you were in law enforcement?
Well, I had a lot of them, actually. Little background first. I started in law enforcement in 1989. I was 18 years old, fresh out of high school. 8 days after I graduated high school, I started at the sheriff's department. The first week or so that I was on duty, I mean, we had a fatal accident. The guy was pretty much beheaded. And there I stood at 18 years old watching this. I mean, I've heard stories from my dad. He's a Vietnam veteran about, disemboweled people and beheaded people. And, Vietnam was not a good place. And I never thought I'd see it on our highways, but there I was.
We were just talking about that before you came back in, the trauma that our veterans face. So I can imagine
Absolutely.
what your dad had to face, and even as a law enforcement officer, what you had to face. When you look back at all the stuff that's happened to you, what's the hardest part of that time for you? In other words, like, I was just saying,
it never leaves. That's the problem.
Right. Now, walk us through some of the things you remember feeling, after certain events happened. Okay, like give us an event and let for our listeners' sake, okay, explain to them what you went through and you were feeling, maybe after the event or a week after the event.
Well, and that's where it gets hard is after the fact. I mean, during, yeah, you got a job to do. You was trained to do it, and you do it the best you can. And I walked away, so that was the best part of it. The worst part was everybody didn't walk away from it. There was from motor vehicle crashes and the death scenes there, homicides, suicides. I spent 5.5 years on our SWAT team, and there was one incident that really just jumps out in this conversation. We had a pursuit that led to another county. It was like a 20-hour standoff afterwards. The guy was in a gas station, and at the end of it, we decided we were going to advance and eliminate him, and that's exactly what we did. There were some high fives afterwards because we did what we was trained to do. And then you go home, and it hits you. That was somebody's son. That was somebody's husband or boyfriend. I wasn't sure his marital status or if he had children. Here I am at home with my kids, and he didn't get to go home to his kids because of decisions that he made. And then it hits you, was it his decision that he made, or is it the decision that we made to eliminate that problem? And that's what doesn't go away. It's an unanswered question, and it'll never have an answer but your mind keeps asking you over and over and over. I've seen a lot of 2 a.m.s since I've left law enforcement where I'm off. I'm supposed to be in bed asleep. I find myself staring at the wall or ceiling or get up and walk around or find something to do because you just can't sleep. I've went and seen a psychologist in the last, I don't know, probably 5 years or so. But back then, that wasn't acceptable. We couldn't just go see a psychologist because they'd take your gun and your badge. If you're not
Yep.
mentally stable, you can't do the job. So they taught us how to be liars. And that's the bottom line. You lied about it. You joked about it. The old joke about what color eyes did he have? Well, they're blue. One blue this way and one blue that way. That's funny on the scene, but that
But
was a
it's not.
real
Yeah, I get.
person. That was a real person.
Mm-hmm.
It's
You know,
And I guess that's why. Go ahead, Eric.
it's gallows humor, which I mean,
mhm,
and I can
absolutely.
only imagine what the things that Dave has seen. I mean, I haven't seen anything like that, but even as a therapist, I mean, I've seen nothing like that, but things that are
Mhm,
traumatic. And the I've always told students that are like interns, and are learning from us, who therapists that are practicing and everything. I always tell them that there may be times where it'll seem like, you may be in a staffing and it may seem like somebody's just absolutely heartless because they're laughing at something. It's like,
oh,
but
I get
that
it all the
is,
time.
yeah, it's gallows humor. And
Mhm,
we adapt. If you
mhm,
can't find the humor in things, we just cry ourselves to sleep every night,
sure.
and so I feel for you, Dave. I hate
Well,
that you've been through that stuff, man.
yeah, it gets crazy. I mean, like I said, I finally broke down after I left law enforcement. They couldn't take the badge or to give it back. Um, I talked endless hours with my wife about it, and I finally broke down. Went over to a mental health facility and just chatted with them. I wasn't in the mental health facility. I wasn't inpatient or nothing. It was all just visits.
Yeah.
Um, and when story time hit, I mean, I could just see the look in their eyes. Holy cow. And they said, I've never really talked to anybody about this kind of stuff. We had some old retired vets come in and talk to us, and we give them something and went on. And they said, "What can we help you with?" I said, "I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I don't know the answers. My biggest problem is I can't sleep. I go to sleep, the dreams start, I wake up. I had restless leg syndrome for a while. They gave me some gabapentin for that, and I looked at the side effects. My wife dug into it, and she's like, "Oh my God, this stuff's like not good." So I quit
It
taking it.
causes seizures. Yeah.
Absolutely. So I quit taking it, and then I told him, I said, I need some sleep. Can you order me a case of sleep? And they put me on trazodone. I started off like 100 milligrams, wasn't doing nothing. Went 200 milligrams. I was on 300 milligrams of trazodone and still could not sleep. It was like taking M&Ms. And I just quit. And I'll take something that'll get me to sleep, but I don't stay there. So the Nyquil, Z-Quil, or whatever, that worked really good. But I probably drank 2 55-gallon drums of that stuff in my time. And it's not an
Mhm.
exaggeration. I buy it 2 bottles, 3 bottles at a time at Walmart. It gets me to sleep. And I wake up and I think, man, I've been asleep all night. And I look up at the clock and it's like midnight. So now what do? I got to get up at 5 and go to work. I work in an emergency room now as a tech. You know, I
Yeah.
I miss that adrenaline. I miss that action. I miss that stuff. And we go into our trauma room with a patient comes in, heart attack, whatever. And we're doing CPR, and you look around and people's got tears in their eyes and they're working and stuff. And I was like, we need to push more. We need to do this. We need to do that. And then they call it. They're dead. And then I go to the next room and say, "What can I get for you?"
Yeah.
You just got to keep on
And
rolling.
it's one of the reasons why, and people just don't realize there's such a high incident. I mean, I remember back when my dad, was living at home. There's such
Mhm.
a high incident rate of suicide amongst police
Absolutely.
officers.
Yep.
Yeah,
Still this day. I
and
mean, it still happens.
yeah. Well, were you able to? I mean, you go through a situation that's traumatic. Were you
Mhm.
able to go to like one of the other officers that were involved and talk to them,
Nah,
or was that just all
that's
completely taboo.
That's taboo. Yeah. They actually
Yeah.
sent me, it was, I left in 2008 after 20 years. And it's probably 2002, I think it was. It was right after I went to the police department from the county. They sent me to a critical incident stress debriefing class. And I was going to be the department instructor on that. Not too long after that, we had an accident just south of town. It was one of our nurses. Her and two of her daughters were killed in a car crash. She's like a sister to us, we're all little town, go to the hospital all the time. She worked in the emergency room, so we all knew her kids, knew her husband, knew everybody. So after it was all done and cleaned up, I got a hold of Lee's in our town there and said, "Hey, can I borrow your conference room?" They said, "Absolutely. What you got?" And I told them what was going on. They said, "We'll put refreshments in there. You got it. Not going to charge you guys a dime. Thanks for your service." I said, "That's awesome." So call this mandatory meeting. Everybody goes in there. I got my folders out. I got pictures. I got everything. We're going to talk this out. So introduce the little class there and tell them what's going on. And this is what we're here for. And they all look up and said, "Are we done?" "What do you mean, are we done?" I says, "We're not going to open up. We're not going to say anything, because if we do, we don't work here no more." And they got up and walked out.
Yeah.
And that was just in, like I said, 2002-ish, somewhere in there.
So is that now? You're saying that's not even changing even today?
Not that I know of. I mean, they've lightened up a lot on our trainings at the police academy. It just gives me, I don't know, I get it. My stomach turns when I see things that's going on, like at the police academy and stuff, because they have stress cards. You can pull a stress card if you get too overwhelmed. You can go take a little walk or get a little drink of water, or, talk to somebody about something. That's not out in the real world. I don't have a stress card. Last time I was getting shot at, they didn't give me a stress card. I've been stabbed in both hands with knives. I didn't get a stress card. I got blood and a scar. I can't say, "Hey, Mr. Bad Guy, stop."
Oh. Oh, did we lose him?
Are you still there?
Hello.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're there. Okay, good.
Are you
We
there?
worried we might have lost you for a second.
I froze.
I'll help you.
Hang tight.
We're here. Okay, he looks like he closed his camera or something. Yeah, we're here. Oh, now you're not. Okay, he will be back in a second here. I mean, Dr. Davis, you probably have heard a lot of the same stuff that he's saying, as far as police officers, who can't really talk about it.
Yeah. That's just indicative of the stigma, and that's the thing. The stigma is, well, if you talk to a helping professional, you must be crazy. The reality is most of my clients, like they're the regular people, they're all regular people. They're just dealing with things. And the thing is, they're not weird. They're not crazy. There's that stigma though. And that's really unfortunate, because what Dave was talking about was, think about that. Here's individuals on the front line, but if they say that they're having a difficult time, or that, hey, this traumatic experience that we all just went through is bothering me, if you say anything, oh, you're crazy. It's so unfair. But that, unfortunately, that stigma exists all over the place, even in the police departments, like he's saying.
You see, that's what always drove me nuts when, people would complain and say, he just pulled his gun really fast, or he shot at the person, without actually seeing that there wasn't a gun in his hand, that the guy pulled a banana or something, out of his pocket. And they don't realize, it's funny because I think I saw it on a newscast a number of years back where, that I know there's a test that the police go through, where they go through a course, like a live shooting thing, where they have to discern who to shoot and who not to shoot during that period of time, and they put this reporter through that, and this reporter ended up killing, in the test, the simulation, ended up killing like 15 people. Okay, because somebody jumps out at you from someplace, and you've been shot at, you've been stabbed. Just using David, you've been shot at, you've been stabbed, you've killed people and stuff like that, and you're going to do what your instincts tell you to do, and they're not always going to be right. But you're in an emergency situation, and you got to make that split-second decision.
Yeah.
And then if they make the right decision, like he said, a high five, thumbs up, But if it's not, now you start, you're on administrative leave, and
You're a
all this stuff,
liability.
and you can't even get help.
Yeah, that's something like I could, Dave would, but I would imagine that part of that is, part of that stigma is, well, now you're a liability. Or I mean, that's just, it's so, I hate that so much. Yeah, I hate that people go through things like that.
Right, and I hate the fact that they can't get the help that they need right away on that, because, like you said, there's that stigma involved, and was very well involved for a number of years, where if you showed signs of weakness and stuff like that, they took you off the force. Yeah, like he said, they took your gun and your shield from you. Just turn it in at the gate, and that's it. And it's over, and, there's nothing else. I'm glad he's back, because we were really we were really killing a lot of time till Dave came back.
Yay.
There you
Technology's
are.
great.
Yeah.
I don't know what happened.
You gotta love technology.
My phone rang and it knocked me off.
Yeah, well, that would do it.
We're going to have a technology PTSD class here in a little bit.
Amen,
No,
my
I'm
friend.
going to need psychiatric help before
yeah.
it's done. Okay, between the place we're at and everything that's happening tonight.
Right.
But you know what? It's real and it's live, and that's what happens. And real live events here. I mean, heck, we're streaming on a different YouTube channel than what we were supposed to be we advertised.
Well,
because the original stream just didn't go. Okay,
that's a great example right there, actually, and maybe that's why it happened. Everything happens for a reason, but that's law enforcement. I mean, you could be eating supper and get a call, and 5 minutes later be pointing a gun at somebody.
Right,
and you just don't know. There's no warning to it. It's right now. And when you go through the academy, they teach you, everybody's bad. Everybody's got a gun. Everybody's got a knife. They're trying to hurt you or kill you or stab you or something. And then everybody's like, well, why do you want to do that? Why do you want to train like that? Well, because you got to be ready. Not everybody has a gun. Not everybody has a knife, but you're ready for it. Yeah. And it's hard to explain
I don't know
to
if you heard us when you were off there. I was talking about the simulation things that you go through, the different scenes, where people, things pop out and stuff that, you got to decide who to shoot and what not to shoot.
That is called a FATS training simulator, firearms training simulator.
There you go. Okay.
It's a wide screen video, and you have a real weapon in your hand that has a wire coming up into the magazine that has your laser in it. Your laser's connected to the screen, so every shot you take is recorded. So they're going to play it back when you're done and show you how you shoot when you're scared. Now, the first time I went through that, I said to myself, this is a video game. I'm not going to get into this. I'm not a gamer. I don't like video games. I played Pac-Man a time or two. That's about it.
Yep.
I got in front of the screen, and it's like, oh, wow, this is almost realistic. And then your heart starts beating a little harder, and you get into it, and pretty soon you're yelling and screaming at these people on the screen in front of you. Drop the weapon, drop the knife, whatever. And once you start pulling that trigger, you're sweating. I mean, it brought it out of you. And it was crazy, because here I am thinking, that's the video. We had one guy that pepper sprayed the screen. He got so involved in it. They had to stop training, get the fumes out of the room, wipe the screens down and stuff, because that's what he's going to do on the street. So, I mean, that's a good reaction, but, leave that stuff in your locker next time, I guess, when you're training. But, yeah.
Well, I'm sure from that point forward, they asked everyone, make sure they didn't have
yeah,
it on
absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
that was brought up.
them. I'm quite
Yeah.
sure it was brought up there.
Yeah.
What Dave, was there a moment? What was the moment? I probably is a better way of putting it, that you realized that you needed or wanted to begin healing.
Well, there we go. My wife's over here in the background saying, "You need to tell them how it affects you every day." And there you go. It affects
Mm-hmm.
me all the time. I mean, you always hear, a cop won't sit with his back to the door in a restaurant and, this and that. That is nothing but
I'm a cop's son,
100%
and I won't do
truth.
that.
Absolutely. When I go
And that's,
someplace, I mean,
Dave, that's why police officers park facing opposite ways too, right?
absolutely. You
Yeah.
see every direction.
Mhm.
Yeah, everybody's like, well, they're just car to car because their driver's doors are matching. I can see everywhere, and if I can't see it, he can. And if I don't trust you, I ain't parking next to you.
Mm-hmm.
That's just a sad truth. There's officers that I've worked with that I didn't want to be in a bad situation with. I got bad vibes, or I've seen them train. They just didn't do anything for me. I mean, being an instructor, I was an instructor for 10 and a half of those years, certified through the police academy, trained bunches of people in bunches of things. I assisted in the training of our SWAT team. I mean, I done it. If I don't trust you, I don't trust you. I'll give you a silly call to go to while I'm on a serious one if I have to. But yeah, I mean, it just when it starts affecting you every day and all the time. I mean, there's times that I pulled up to a gas station before, and my wife's going to run in and grab some smokes and a drink or whatever for us, and I'm sitting out front listening to the radio, and somebody walks in the store, and I was like, nope, she ain't going anywhere with that guy, and I shut the car off and go in. She's like, what are you doing? And I just kind of nudged my nose over towards this guy getting a Polar Pop, and she's like, what? I said, ain't happening. I can't get you from outside. And the big deal that happened in my life was at a gas station, 20-hour standoff. My wife's not going to be that hostage.
That hostage, yep.
Yeah. And nothing happened. Guy went in to get a Polar Pop. And I narrowed it down to, this is how I'm going to kill you. In my head. And I got out of the car and walked in with my wife on several occasions.
Yeah.
Or she'll be planning on going into the store or something, or the gas station. I was like, I got it. My theory is if something happens, she can get in the car and drive off, and she's out of danger.
Right, out of harm's way.
And people don't realize that danger that you're afraid to put somebody else in, you just stepped into it voluntarily.
Yeah.
And
it's almost like it's built into your blood.
It
the
is.
moment
It's
that
programmed.
you take that oath.
Yep.
Yep.
It is programmed. And my wife's over here. It's exhausting because it's all the time. It doesn't go away.
Well, I can sympathize with her, and just let her know, because growing up in a family of police officers, with my dad and stuff, I spent a lot of time with my dad going places and stuff,
Mm-hmm.
and I can relate to 99% of what you're saying there.
Sure.
Because it's the same way. You see things differently as a police officer
Mm-hmm.
than most people, like maybe someone like Eric is going to see it. I know I'm a little bit of that from, being his son all those years.
Sure.
I look over my shoulder. I have to know in a restaurant exactly where everybody is, where every door is and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So if there's a situation, I can immediately respond to it.
Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah. Now, who or what has played a role in the beginning of that healing process? Has it been just the therapy? Has your wife and family been a part of that?
I would have to hand that over to my wife, because I went through 3 different marriages in law enforcement. I got out in 2008. I met my wife now in 2009. In 2010, we got married. And yesterday was our 15th anniversary.
Yes.
She won. She won the race. Yeah. We've talked a lot. She's the one that talked me into going to therapy, and I was like, nope, ain't happening. Is not going to happen. I even told the therapist this isn't going to happen when I'm sitting in their office.
At least you were honest.
Yeah, I was, and
Like, hey,
just like when I left the sheriff's department, went to the police department. I went through a different retirement program. So I went into PERF, the Public Employee Retirement Fund. Part of that is you have to have a medical eval and a psychological eval. So went to Indianapolis, did the medical eval first. They give you about a half hour in between. You come back and you do the psychological. I don't remember the name of it. You probably do know. It's like a 550 some question test that you got to go through, filling in the little dots back in the day. And they get done and they give you a little break and you come back in, you sit down with the psychologist and you go over your results.
Yeah.
And I'll give you a little age thing on me. They put the cassette recorder in front of me to record my sitting with them there. And she's like, hey, before we get started, I just have to tell you, I cannot recommend you to be a police officer in the state of Indiana. I was like, what? I mean, I just left my job at the sheriff's department to come to the police department. I'm thinking, what? I just lost my job? I lost my career. I can't do this. What's going on? And I didn't say it out loud to her, but I did say, well, what's going on? She says, well, we're going to go over that. But there's 13 red flag questions in those 500 and I think it was 55 questions that I answered. She said, you hit all 13 of them. I said, well, is that good? Is that, I don't understand what you're saying. She says, no, the red flag questions are bad and you hit all 13. I cannot recommend you be a police officer in the state of Indiana. I said, well, I just left the sheriff's department to come to the police department. She said, you were a sheriff's deputy before? I said, yeah. She said, oh, okay, you're okay. I was like, well, what do you mean I'm okay? And she says, well, the stuff that, have you ever pointed a firearm at somebody and intended on using it? That's not good unless you're a policeman. Have you ever been in a fight and intended on hurting somebody? Yeah. And she said, well, that's not okay unless you're a policeman. I was like, well, I'm glad there's a stipulation because I didn't want to lose my career.
Or your name is Mike Tyson or something.
Absolutely. But, and that even works on you. I mean, now it's okay to hurt somebody because I'm a policeman? I mean, how's that right?
Do you feel like, Dave, that a lot of the PTSD, and obviously you went through extremely traumatic things, but something you said earlier really stuck out to me. And you were like, it's like the event happens and you got a job to do, so you just don't have time to process. But then you said, afterwards is where the things, like when you, how soon after any traumatic event did you notice differences? Or did you notice that things were different for you? You know what I mean?
To me, it was like automatic. I mean, just as soon as it was happening, it's like, yeah, it's going to mess me up for a bit.
Yeah.
But I couldn't stop. There's no place to pull over. You can't stop your ride. Because I mean, I've worked a fatal accident before, and as soon as I went what we called 10-8 back in service, they said, you got a title check to go to. Okay, so I go over and run somebody's VIN number and make sure it's not stolen. And then they send me to a shoplifter at Walmart. I was like, okay, I can do that. And there's no processing it, I've been on fatal accidents on the interstate before that took like 8+ hours to clean up and stuff. And the guys will come over and say, oh, what are you doing? I mean, I'm blocking the road now. I've already worked the crash. And now we got wreckers coming in and stuff. And they're like, what are you doing? I said, I got hungry. I ordered a pizza. Had a pizza delivered to the crash scene. I said, how are you eating? I said, well, you have to eat. I mean, it just doesn't bother me. And when I got with my wife now, I've got that morbid sense of humor. And she wasn't with me when I was a police officer. So that's a big change in my life. She didn't get to see that side of me. And she's over here chuckling right now. But we've had conversations, and her children, my stepkids, which are all adults, all of our kids are adults now. But one of her kiddos asked me one day about my lack of feelings. Because I don't get upset over things. I don't cry at funerals. I've always told somebody I just don't have those feelings, She's like, I'm just so afraid. She's in tears. I mean, this is a serious conversation we're having. She says, I'm afraid that one of these days something's going to happen to my mom and you're going to call me and say, "Hey, your mom died. What's for supper?"
Yeah.
And I was like, "Wow, am I that much of an ass?"
The thing is,
Yeah,
it's not, but it's not being an ass. It's,
right.
and I can only imagine. You correct me if I'm wrong, because I can't even imagine what it would be like to be a police officer. So,
Mhm.
but like obviously, like you said, we don't turn our back to anything. We
Mm-mm.
have to be ready to go. All of those we're adapting. You have to be like that in that
Sure.
environment. You have to adapt to survive and to protect the community and all that. But then afterwards, once the environment changes, then it can become maladaptive, and that's
Hmm.
a lot of times that's where we'll see, just aside from traumatic events or whatever. But I mean, that's where we see PTSD a lot of times.
Absolutely. And
Dave, let
I
me ask you:
go ahead.
had, did faith? Yeah, because I know you do have deep faith. Has faith helped you at all during all of this?
Well, it's funny you brought that up because when I first started in law enforcement, I was almost like what the way my dad explained Vietnam. How is there a God if I'm over here doing this? Where is he at? And like I said, I started at 18. I didn't grow up in a church family by any means. I mean, we didn't go to church when I was growing up. I don't have any Sunday school stories to tell because I wasn't there. Um, so I mean, I believed in God, but I wasn't like a follower, if that makes any sense. I wasn't. But the older I got, the more I saw it, and I feel like I was put there for a reason. And I've always said that. To me, being a policeman wasn't my job; it was my life. And I feel like that's what I was told to do, and that's what I did. I mean, everybody in my family, law enforcement, military, something. So I was like, yeah, I'm one of them. But now looking back, I can see where I feel like God pulled me through a lot of stuff.
He has a plan for all of us,
He does.
and yeah, and it's really been. I meant to tell you before. You said you were married 3 times.
Hmm.
That's actually not true. You were married 4 times
Okay.
because every cop is married to the job.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no question about that.
Yeah.
Because it's a full time
Well,
job.
and it's funny you say that because they actually hit on that at the police academy because you get your wedding ring from your wife and you're suffering from the job.
Hmm.
I've never heard
Yeah,
that before, Dave, but I
absolutely.
love it.
I've used that in classes before. When you're at the police academy and they're walking up and down, they find stuff to pick on you first couple of weeks, just like boot camp in the military, you're nothing but a low life, yada yada. If you just leave now and get us, do us all a favor and get out of here, you're not worth being here. And well, they want to break you down and rebuild you. Well, after that starts over or that stage is over, then they come through with the advice. And they're like, do not, I repeat, do not have kids with your first wife because you'll find out what child support really is. And there was a lot of truth in that because I don't know too many guys that stayed married in law enforcement. I don't know if some of it was them cheating or their wife cheating or whatever, but a lot of it was just worked all the time. I mean, when I left the county and went to the city, I had 680 hours of comp time stored up.
Wow.
That's time that I worked that I wasn't scheduled to work that they owed me pay for. And when I left the city police department, I had 640 of those hours stored up. I was never home.
Yeah.
See, and that's the thing. You give up your life.
Hmm.
And that's why the divorce. What I was going to say, why the divorces are so high, because it
Absolutely.
is infidelity is part of it, but
Hmm.
it's part of it also because number one, from the woman's side or the spouse's side, that's not a police officer. I mean, I insult
Hmm.
female police officers,
Sure, sure.
but from the spouse side, they're never here.
Right.
They're more married to that job than they are to me.
Hmm.
And the same way on the other side, the officer itself is just. I personally think you become so immune to a lot of things in life that it doesn't seem like such a bad thing. And it's like, here's someone that actually cares about me right now, and I'm
Right.
feeling like crap, and they're here, and I'm going to go with this.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm just not going to like when you pull that trigger and you're not thinking about it first.
Right.
You're pulling a different trigger,
Yep.
and you're going. You're not thinking about it.
Yep.
So
Yep. You can end a life. You can end a life with the pull of a trigger, and you can lose a relationship with it.
how is everything that you went through shaped who you are today?
Well, that's a
We
tough
can talk good
question.
and bad if
Yeah.
you want. That's up to
Oh
you.
yeah, I mean that's a tough question. I mean, some people don't. I mean, like where I work now in the emergency room, some people that I work with don't want to work with me because they think I'm just a cold-hearted old man. You know, I mean, there's times that you'll get out, and I don't do it in front of family and stuff, but there's times you'll get out of a room, a trauma room, somebody died, and you joke about it. And they're like, how can you do that? That was a person, that was a live human being. And they're like, well, ain't no more, you know? It's just, it's no disrespect to the family or the body or whatever you want to call it. It's just, that's how you learn to do it on your own. And I've told, some of the people there, if I don't joke about it, I'd be in the corner in a fetal position. I'm not doing anybody any good there.
Dr. Davis, do you think that's just your body's defense mechanism
Absolutely.
think
It
of
is.
not actually dealing 100% with
Yep.
the fact that someone just died in front of you?
Yep.
Yeah,
It
I
is.
think some of it's cognitive dissonance, which our brain does to protect us. It was something I remember reading about cognitive dissonance that I thought was really interesting. Was when the levee broke. So when New Orleans had the flood,
Hmm.
and they said that a lot of the individuals that lived like miles from the levee, they left. They couldn't get out fast enough. But a lot of people that lived right up against the levee were like,
Mhm.
"There's no way that could happen. Are you kidding
Mhm.
me?" And then it did. And so
Right.
it was saying like that cognitive dissonance, their brain was doing that to
Hmm.
protect them. But you know,
Right. And then you go back to that flood, and the people you seen on the news in the little John boats waving at the camera were the people that lived there, and they're waving like nothing's going on because they don't
Yeah.
want to stop and think about it.
Yeah.
Just lost my house, lost my car, lost my everything. Everything's gone. All I got is this boat I'm setting my butt in. So I'm gonna wave to cameras.
Yeah, all your memories, everything.
Hmm.
It's just
Sure.
gone in one shot.
Absolutely.
So what I have to try to sum this up because we've gone on with the show a long time tonight. Uh, what would you say to someone who's carrying that unspoken pain, that's lived the life that you have, Dave? What would you say to them that's listening right now that may have gone through the same thing and just keeping it all bottled up inside?
Swallow your pride and get some help. That's about it. I mean, everybody's thinking about losing that job, losing that career. I was in the same boat. I'm still here. I'm working in an emergency room now, so I feel like I'm still doing some good for somebody, but I carry that every day with me though.
Yeah.
And I didn't get the help I needed when I needed it. And now I can talk about it all I want because I'm not doing it anymore.
Mhm.
It's memories now, but those memories keep you up at night and they eat you.
Yeah.
And I don't think there's a pill around that's going to help me. I heard earlier when I wasn't on here, but I could hear you guys when I have my difficulties here. The ketamine IVs.
Yeah.
I've been told that that's the way to go. Okay. So I checked into it. There's a doctor at the hospital that I work with that does them.
Yeah.
$2,500.
Wow.
Insurance doesn't cover it.
Yeah.
Dave can't afford it. So when I'm talking to the doc, he's like, well, talk it over with your wife. I'm sure she'll be willing to put that money in just to have a better husband. It's like, well, she married me when I was like that. She knew what I was like. And
And dang it, she stuck with you now.
she
Okay.
Yeah.
is. um, I feel like over the years that I've been together, and I'm sure if I'm wrong, she'll smack me in the head. I've gotten better. I mean, I'm not as bad as I was with all of it. Um, I remember not too long after we got together, she was a little concerned about me watching everybody. If we went someplace, I was watching everybody, male, female, anything. I'm sure she's over here. It was exhausting. I'm sure she's like, well, why is he looking at her? Why is he looking at that person? I'm looking for guns and knives and shaky
Yep.
hands, and now that that part's over in my life, when we go to Walmart, I'm looking at people's arms saying, yeah, I can get that vein with an IV. I mean, it's all changed now. It's a different aspect, but I mean, the other part's still there. It doesn't go away. I mean, we have people come in. I had a guy come in from a motor vehicle accident. He's on a backboard strapped in. He's yelling, screaming. He's hurting bad. We got medics and we got firemen and stuff trying to get him on the bed. Well, I reach under I just basically do a check on their lower back and I pull my hand out, see if there's blood or anything, before we take them off the backboard. And when I reached in, I felt something. I pulled out a holster.
Oh, wow.
I almost yelled gun. I didn't have a gun. I had a holster. But when I pulled it out, the fireman looks over and says, he had a weapon. The state trooper has it. Whew, thank you. Because what do I do now? If I think this guy has a gun in the ER, do I beat him up and get his gun? I mean, he's already been beat up in the crash. He's not causing a threat. It's just that gun. And that memory pops up. I have to do something. I have to stop this.
Yeah.
And then I got to stop and think, no, you're a tech. Get ready to give him an IV. So it's
And
hard to put that out.
I try to tell Jen that now,
Mhm.
who actually, as we're speaking right now, is doing clinical in an
Absolutely.
ER here in Ocala.
Yeah.
And, it's like, read the paper, okay? The stuff that's going on, people going in and shooting up the ERs and stuff
Absolutely.
like that. You have to be very, very aware of what's happening at all times. And you're just, it's almost like with you've gone from one really stressful situation
Mhm.
to another stressful situation.
It's following me. but I felt like
Yes.
she's over here too. You needed to do that. I feel like I felt like I had to do that. I mean, I started at the
Well, it's been a part
hospital.
of you.
Yeah, I started at the
It,
hospital in 2020 when COVID started up. COVID hit,
mhm.
I went to the hospital. I signed up and I had a job there as a tech upstairs. I didn't really like it. It's like working in a nursing home. I had some medical problems going on at the same time. I had some surgery, so I laid out for about 8 months or so. I called them and said, "Hey, will you bring me back to the hospital?" They said, "Absolutely. We loved you here. Where do you want to go?" I said, "I want to go to the ER." "Are you sure?" I said, "Absolutely. That's where I wanted to go the first time. You wasn't hiring." I went straight to the ER and I've been there ever since. It was like it was another meant to be.
Yep. Well, Dave, listen, I want to thank you for joining us tonight on the show.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Sorry we didn't get you earlier.
Oh, you're good.
We would have talked some more.
Yeah,
And then
absolutely.
again, we might even talk more in the future
Send
on
me a
here
link. I'll
just
talk
because we're covering
anytime.
it tonight. Yeah.
Anytime.
So, but thank you for joining us tonight,
Right.
and hope things work out well for you.
Absolutely. Thank you guys.
Yeah,
All right.
absolutely, man.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Now, Eric, I just wanted to then follow up with you. You heard what he had to say to anybody that was listening right now. You have anything you want to add to that? Because
You
that's what
know,
we started at before.
yeah, I think, what he said about, if just get some help, if you're struggling, if you're stressed out, if you're having trouble sleeping, the thing is, there is that stigma. There's a societal stigma or the self stigma, but there are tons of resources out there that can help you. I tell people all the time, like, you know, if you just can't find resources, reach out to me. I'll help you find resources. There's always help available if we just look for it. And one of the things I always try and keep in mind is a lot of times the only difference between a person that survives things and a person who doesn't is the one person asked for help and accepted the help. And I can't stress that enough.
Okay. And there are so many organizations that you said out there. Just look, there's even like big groups like NAMI that we talked about.
Yeah.
and they have chapters all over the United States, and they can even hook you up, to someone local in your area, that's going to be able to help you. Now, listen, we want to thank everybody for tuning in to this episode tonight. Okay, this has been a powerful episode, and this episode isn't over. It will be carried on. We'll do more in the very near future. We got some great shows that are lining up. So just remember, if today's conversation on trauma resonated with you at all, just know that healing is possible. You just have to make that first step. Okay, that's really what it comes down to. Like you said, you survive. Those that survived actually reached out for help. So make that first step right now. Don't hesitate to reach out. Okay, and don't forget to share this episode too with someone who might need it, and you might be saving their life. Okay, and that's something you need to think about. With all the shows that we're doing, like I think I said this the other week, you may not think that this relates to you, but then you're going to see it might relate to somebody else. And them hearing it and realizing that they're not alone is so important. And please remember to hit that subscribe button. Last time I looked, which is right now, we've had 918 subscribers. Okay, we really want to get over 1,000. So, in 8 weeks, that really isn't bad. 918, we're really getting up there. Hit the like button. Okay, you can also hit the bell, so you can change the settings so you know when the show's coming up. We'll be back next week, and next week we already have lined up about sleep and the importance of sleep to your mental health and to your physical health. Now, we actually have lined up a sleep doctor who's been willing to come on the air with us and talk about the benefits and stuff from a physical side of getting the proper amount of sleep. And then again, from the mental side, we'll have Dr. Davis here. Will be able to give us, the mental health side of it too. Just remember, this is a place where every episode's a journey into the heart of what truly matters: your health, your adventures, the issues that are facing our world, and especially your life today. Whether you're seeking inspiration, whether it's tips, or simply a moment of reflection, we truly hope this podcast helps you encompass everything that there is out there and helps you navigate towards a beautiful life that we all want to live. Please stay strong, stay hopeful, and remember, your story matters, your journey matters, your pain and suffering are valid. And above all, please never forget, your life matters. God bless you all, and we hope to see you again next week.